Okay, welcome everyone. This is a regularly scheduled select board meeting. It is Wednesday, April 27th. My name is Roger Arnold. I'm joined by Mary Layton, Vice Chair, Claudette Brochu, Rob Gear, Marcia Calloway, board members, and also Rod Francis, our town manager, is with us, of course. This is a remote only meeting under the temporary provisions made for the open meeting law, which means there is not a physical location to participate contemporaneously. I will also say that we welcome all public comments for all items on the agenda. Select board discussion would be prioritized, and please phrase your public comments as comments rather than questions. Questions will be taken as rhetorical. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. We have one request, the Records Restoration Reserve Fund. We from last meeting, we made an approval for an expenditure. There is a revised purchase order. There is about $1,000 increase that was unanticipated and that we need to approve as a result. So I would like to add that to the agenda. Otherwise, I would accept a motion. Go ahead, Marcia. You're on mute.
My apologies. I am wondering if we can or should switch items 10 and 11 to make sure that we have time for an executive session.
Thank you, Marcia. So one of the things I also wanted to say, and I forgot here in the Zoom space, is I really want to work through this agenda efficiently, right? And so we can table agenda items as necessary, and I really want the ARPA discussion and that executive session to be prioritized. So if we're running over in any way, we should consider tabling that discussion and then reordering after our break. How's that? So yes, we should consider reordering as necessary, and I agree that that's more of a priority. How's that? Okay. Good. So was that a motion?
That's a motion.
Okay. Okay. Is there a second to approve the agenda as amended?
I second.
Okay. Made by Marcia, seconded by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. The next item on the agenda, I believe, is the public comment for items that are not on the agenda. So for folks, please just state your name and address, and again, consider making a public comment as a comment. Andy Shear, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Andy Shear, 23 Hazen Street. And the fact that I live on Hazen Street is particular to my comment. On April 14th, myself and other residents on Hazen Street and Cliff Street received the following message. Dear Norwich Fire District residents, the water main replacement project for Hazen and Cliff Street has been put out to bid, and the contract was awarded to a local contractor, L&M Service Contractor. The tentative start date for the project is late August 2022. As more information becomes available, we will update you. From Sam, Michael Tibbetts, and Mike Wells, and Sam Eaton. So anyway, if you recall, Hazen and Cliff water main replacement is long overdue. When due to poor communication, the road was repaved before the water main could be replaced many years ago. So if the fire district and the town wouldn't rip up newly paved streets for wastewater or for delivering water, I don't think that they would do that for wastewater pipes. So in an effort to save money, given the streets will be torn up in August, would it not be a good time to lay wastewater pipes at the same time during the construction? We're not hooking anything up, just laying them. I hope the town is seriously considering adding wastewater and sewers to the village, especially given the situation of the town green. This winter, Marion Cross had their tanks pumped weekly, no doubt costing the school and the taxpayers tens of thousands or thousands and thousands of dollars for each pumping. So as a homeowner in the village, the inevitable failure of my septic field will cost me personally tens of thousands of dollars for its engineering and replacement. So instead, I would gladly take that money, pull it together with the other members of the village, and use it towards building out a wastewater system. So just to give you a little math here, our family of 4 uses 25,000 gallons of water each year. For every 4 houses, that's 100,000 gallons in a year. 10 years, that's a million gallons of water dumped down into our soils below us. So just to put that perspective out there, I hope that that would be something that could be considered at a future meeting. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good evening.
Thanks so much, Andy, for your comment. Are there any other public comments for items not on the agenda? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Raise hand is on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I think *9 to raise your hand on phone. Okay, then with nothing further to that, I would like to move on to the consent agenda, if that's okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I so move.
Okay, made by Mary. Is there a second? Okay, Claudette, do you want to make a comment?
I do. Unfortunately, the minutes, and I know, I don't know how procedurally to go about this, but in our last meeting, our final motion was to allow the chair, or to authorize the chair and another select board member to identify and contract with an HR professional. It was late in the day, and clearly 2 members of the board can't authorize a contract.
Sure, of course.
So I don't know how. I mean, Roger and I did the work, but we never entered into a contract. We were bringing that before the full board, and I don't know how to fix that.
Well, so here's a suggestion that I would make, which is to have the April 27th meeting minutes say that while that work did not take place, we have not actually contracted with a qualified HR professional, right? So while we may have said that in our meeting on April 13th, we can now say on April 27th that did not occur. We identified that work. Is that procedurally, is that helpful?
It is, and I guess, is that clear for the rest of the board?
Yeah, and we could be more careful in the future on things like that.
So I just want these minutes to clearly reflect that Roger and I did not enter into a contract. We did the investigation, but we are bringing a proposed contract with an HR consultant back to this board tonight for discussion and possible approval.
Right, which has always been our practice in situations like this, right? Okay, right, because of course, as Claudette alluded to,
So otherwise, I second the consent agenda.
Okay, so thank you for that discussion. So made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. Thanks so much for that discussion point, which I see Miranda noting. Thank you, Miranda. Any further discussion on the approval of the consent agenda? Go ahead, Marcia.
One question on page 4 of the packet, which is in the accounts payable. There's something $25 payroll transfer for mayor and mayor. What's that?
Is Fielding, I don't know if you're available. If it's okay, Rod, I might just go to Fielding, is that okay? Fielding, what is mayor? Who's mayor and mayor?
This is an employee withholding that we that we do for an employee payment that needs to be made.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Fielding. Okay, if there's no discussion, I'd like to call the question on the approval of the consent agenda. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, the next item is the appointment of a town service officer, and the action is to appoint Stacy Morig, I believe I'm pronouncing your last name
That's right.
to the position of town service officer. Sorry. And so thank you so much for being with us tonight, Stacy. Thank you for your interest in this position. And so what we ask for appointments is tell us a little about your application and why you're interested in serving in this role.
I am good friends with Kate Barlow. She was in the role last year. We talked about it. I have an interest in helping the residents of Norwich, anyone who might need my assistance. I work at the cancer center at the hospital. I'm an outpatient dietitian, so I'm often helping patients find resources for different things. So tend to be pretty resourceful, enjoy helping people, and want to give back to the town.
Okay, great. And the only thing I might say just for as an FYI is it's great that you spoke to the previous town service officer, and there is a little, as you may know or may expect, there's probably a little bit of onboarding in terms of this is a statutorily appointed position. The town maintains a reserve fund that supports a lot of the requests that you might encounter, and then also just and the town manager's office could assist you with that. But I'm sure you might already be aware. But I wanted to let you know that there's some coordination with town staff and when these requests come to you.
Yeah, Kate was nice enough to give me a memo. I don't know if she drafted it or someone else did. To submit requests, as well as a lot of contact information for different people. So
that's lovely.
And other notes as well. So yeah, I feel pretty supported by her.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do folks have any questions for Stacy? Go ahead, Marcia.
Hey, Stacy, thanks for being willing to do this. I'm just wondering, do you have any questions about the parameters of, how much you can do to assist people?
Well, yeah, I mean, from my understanding, all requests are submitted through the select board and have to be approved. But my understanding is it's, a lot of, it might be shelter or emergency fuel, firewood requests, that type of thing. So, I understand I would work with the select board and the town manager and for any help I might need with any requests.
Good.
That's great. Unless folks have any other questions, I would happily take a motion to appoint Stacy.
I'll do that.
Thanks.
I move to appoint Stacy Morig to the position of Town Service Officer for a term to expire on March 31st, 2023.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Okay, with thanks so much for your service. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, so thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the financial dashboard. And so I'll turn it over. Rod, is it appropriate to turn it over to Fielding, who's with us today? So yes, so at our second meeting of the month, we tend to have a financial, well, it was a finance update previous, and now it's a financial dashboard update, which is exciting. And so we'll hear that update from Fielding right now, our finance director.
All right. Hey, everybody. Let me see if I can get this over to share for you.
Yes, now you can.
All right. So hopefully all had a chance to look at it. If not, please let me know if you have any questions, or either way, I guess I should say. couple of the brief highlights. I do think our overall budget performance is strong. We're coming in at 75%, 75.54% performance to budget, which through 9 months of the year is right where we should expect to be. This does include our annual reserve fund allocations. So in effect, we're actually probably performing on an actual operating budget slightly below 3/4 so that's good to see. In terms of in further detail, we're coming in slightly under in terms of our payroll performance, to be expected given the turnover that we've seen especially in the first half of the year. So we've noticed some savings there. Expenses are slightly higher, but that doesn't include our reserve fund allocations. So that's a little bit artificial in terms of where you would be at 3/4. You have to make those reserve funds, those allocations. So you'll see that run slightly high typically. Revenue performance, I've been really happy with. We're coming in just over 98% of revenue. That does include grant funding, as well as primarily our tax collection. Delinquent taxes have been coming in pretty consistently. There's only, I think, just a little over $100,000 outstanding for the year in terms of tax collection. So I'm really happy with that. Scrolling down a little bit, you can see performance by department. The only one that's really kind of shooting over is our general administration. That is largely made up of our computer purchases, as well as just kind of general office expenditures. We had an overage for the postcards to send out for tax notices. That ran I think about $1,800 or so. That was an unbudgeted expense. The general admin line, though, is really pretty small in the grand scheme of things. So while we have gone over on that, I don't foresee too much further damage coming there, and it's a very small portion of our budget. So all in all, we are kind of trending in the right direction. I feel really good about where we're at, especially given the inflationary pressure that we felt over the course of this year. So with that, I'll kind of stop my summary and open it up to see if anyone has any questions.
Okay, so I think a good first question I want to ask board members is, this is sort of the second time we've seen a financial dashboard, and it is the first time that we've seen anything like this. So it's the second time that we have seen anything like this, right? So any general comments about format and presentation at a high level would be appreciated. And then let's get into like actual content questions. So how do we feel about the delivery? And if this tells us what we're interested in at a high level, I guess I would like to hear from all of you. And then let's get into some content questions about, anything you might have about the budget, about the status. Go ahead, Mary, I see your hand.
Just simply stated, I like both the pie charts, the year to date, and also the performance by department. I appreciate having a graphic display of what's happening.
That's great. Thank you, Mary. Any other thoughts on that level? Okay, I see Rob's hand and then Marcia.
Yeah, it would be awesome if, for instance, the different fields and performance by department were represented in a pie chart as each department's percentage of total expense.
Okay. Yeah.
That would make the general admin a little clearer, the impact it might have. But I love it. Very useful, quick, easy to see information.
So more breakdown, but still at a high level is what I'm hearing from Rob. Okay, cool. And then Marcia, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I agree with Rob's comment. even if the general administration fund is a small budgeted area, I am concerned when something has kind of maxed out and what could be left. So I'd kind of like to know when we're looking at this, you know, what's left, and maybe on that pie chart somehow you know, what do we have to pay for and where are we going to get the money? Because we're not through the first quarter yet, really, and I'm worried about that. And
Wait a
This-
minute.
of the year. Sorry.
Marcia, just hold up. The fiscal year doesn't end until July, Marcia. So
Yeah.
this is the end. So
It's the last
the-
quarter.
Yeah.
Last quarter, but we still have time to
Yeah.
maybe incur things. And then some things confuse me, like on page 13 of revenue report, page 3, things like, why is the town report a source of revenue?
I think Fielding might have oh no, there he is. So your question is, why is the town report a source of revenue?
Well, I'm trying
Okay.
to follow the logic of why things are placed in certain places, and that thing seems to me to be an expense, so I'm not sure why it would be lodged as a revenue source as well as an expense.
You know, I will say that that's a good comment. I've tried to present here historically, historic lines, and historically we have budgeted $1,350, including in the current fiscal year. So it does have budgeted. We have budgeted for revenue to be in this line. I will say, being new this year, I'm not actually sure where that revenue would come from. Historically, and it doesn't seem like we have made much revenue on it. So I have that question myself, I'll say. I don't know if folks who've been here longer have more insight to that.
Rod, do you want to respond?
Pardon me, yes. I understand that other organizations help us pay for the production of the report. So we book the contributions from other organizations as a form of revenue.
Great, thanks. Cheryl, I see your hand, but as I said at the start of the meeting, I'm taking public comments at the after board discussion. So thank you. Any other board questions on format or content? We're good. All right, so it's great. So we're 81% here in the final quarter. So thank you, Fielding, for that update. Okay, Cheryl, do you have a comment?
The answer to the question is that the fire district and I believe the library pay for their pages of the town report. Those are the only two entities that I'm aware of that pay towards the production of the town report.
Great, thank you.
And do we have a balance sheet to the financials as well? I just come back from being out of town, and I was just wondering if the balance sheet was also presented.
The packet is on the website.
Okay.
Thank you, Cheryl. Any further public comments? Okay, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Can you stop sharing your screen, Fielding? Thank you.
Yep.
Next is the American Rescue Plan Act funds.
Oh,
So I'm echoing, I don't know why. Okay, so the action is to authorize the standard allowance provision and other follow-up from the 413 TRRC presentation. And so we had a little bit of, we had a memo that was prepared by Rod that could serve as a good basis for our discussion, which I think is a good place to begin. Any board member, I see your hand. Go ahead, Marcia.
I thought when we were talking about the revenue report that the financial dashboard, we were talking first high level and then other stuff. And I did have a couple of other questions.
Great. So I'm happy to go back, but I did ask, I said, are there any other questions on form or content, right? So my apologies if the question was confusing anyway. So
Right.
I'll go back. I'm happy to do that.
Great.
And we have to be cognizant of time, right? So
Right.
any content questions that you have about the financial dashboard, go ahead.
Yeah, this is just a little more in the weeds. So on page 14, there was 51,000 plus for professional services. And I was wondering if that could be broken down a little. I'm just going to go through these quickly. Then there was 15,000 plus for contracted services that looks like it wasn't budgeted. So I didn't know what that was for. There was nothing under legal expenses. I didn't know what SB committee expenses were. That was $3,000. I think we talked about this once before, but I've never understood why the energy committee expenses go under the town administration category. And finally, oh, two more things. The plan on page 16, the planning, I think it's administrator wage. We had spent $47,094 year to date, which is about more than half of what was budgeted. So I'm wondering where that money's going. And then the police officer overtime, we had overtime wages over 34,000. So I'm just wondering what that means in terms of police coverage for the town and individual officer working hours.
Okay. I hope I can remember all of these.
Hold on one second, Fielding. I just want to bring board members' attention. I'm happy. It's 6:57. We're scheduled until 7 for this agenda item. So we'll talk for another 5 minutes, and then I'm going to move us on and trust that Fielding can follow up with Marcia following our meeting. Okay. So go ahead, Fielding. Go with what you heard and you would like to respond to first, and then go ahead. So you were in the process of answering. I just wanted to do a time check, but go ahead.
No problem. I appreciate that. I'll keep it very quick. So professional services, some of these seemed like budgetary questions. Professional services, we are moving forward, going to be separating those out into contracted services and legal. Those are new coding lines that will show up in the fiscal year 23 budget. However, I did plug in the 15,000 for contracted services year to date. That is for the regional energy coordinator. We had moved that off the articles. So you're seeing that expense sit there, although it is currently, it was a carryover from a prior year article that had been funded. From there, the planning administrator wage, that was Rod through his signing of the contract to become the town manager. From there, his wage now goes up into the town administration budget. Until we hire a new planning director, that number at 47,000 and change will stay steady, and you won't see any changes there. And then for police, now that we have Alex Root on as a fully trained and operating police officer, that police officer overtime line, there still will be overtime situations. We are running pretty much at the minimum level in terms of police officers on staff. But previously, we had basically one officer working overtime every single week. Oftentimes it was sprinkled across all of the officers. I do expect that line to increase, but only at a slower rate for the rest of the year. Now that Alex Root is fully operating and independent as a police officer himself, having graduated from the academy about a month ago. I think that covers most of your questions.
Good job.
Okay. All right. So, and yes, that was perfectly on time with my allowance. So thank you so much for your questions. Thank you, Fielding, for answering them. If there's any follow-up, Marcia, that we missed, feel free to send them. and we'll move on to the next agenda item again with thanks. Now it's the ARPA follow-up essentially. What I guess I would like to ask, I think Rod has done a good job of sort of providing an orientation of how we could discuss about this in his memo that was in the packet. Do board members have not so much, let me say this, what were board members' analysis of that memo? Let me ask a broad question. Do you have an analysis from that memo? Go ahead, Marcia, and then go ahead. Yeah.
I didn't agree with it because I felt that what was being proposed was that we have people approve twice as much money as we needed, which wouldn't solve the problem of actually the surplus that we would have by what was being voted. And I'm also concerned that although VLCT says that we can use the money to pay general expenses, I went back and looked at the final rule, which talks about general revenue and which says explicitly that the interim rule is maintained in terms of that definition, with the exception of two things that don't apply to Norwich. And so what I'm concerned about is that even though there's a standard allowance of 10 million, that at some point, because it's still in the final rule, that there is this general revenue requirement, that somehow we would be asked to justify how we spent that money. So I would prefer to get a fresh analysis of what we could do to do something like implement infection prevention measures and ventilation improvements in Tracy Hall, talk to people in town about what they think the money should be used for, and basically not proceed as recommended at the moment. And I'm wondering, I feel compelled to ask if I think the deadline for filing some interim report was the 25th, and I'd like to know if we did that.
Okay, so let's take a step back. So who is echoing? Lord have mercy, who's echoing? Let me see. Cheryl, great. I'm muted. Okay, so sorry. So let's take a step back. Rod, so you looked into, you were also considering VLCT's guidance around revenue replacement. Can you talk a little bit about some of the concerns that in some ways you share with Marcia, and then what has led you to sort of the management question, the management sort of recommendation in your memo? How's that as a question? And I know you consulted with Fielding as well. Is that a good place to start?
Yes, so Fielding and I discussed the setting coming out of the last select board meeting, and both of us have reviewed the VLCT guidance, and I've also reviewed guidance from other states across the country. And the general consensus position, I believe, is that the taking the standard allowance and then booking the ARPA income to the general fund is an appropriate response and is allowed under the rules. So to put it as succinctly as I can, despite some reservations and concerns about reporting and documenting what we were doing, the VLCT guidance appears to be consistent with the guidance across the country. That being said, Fielding and I identify that we are currently running a balance above the prescribed 16% for the emergency reserve fund that was officially renamed and identified at town meeting this past March. So we are conscious that we need to be vigilant and careful and move briskly to ensure that these projects that we're identifying can be expended in the time frame that's allowed, and that we need to manage each year's budget, so the so-called qualifying budget year, very carefully, so that we do not represent that we have a larger reserve fund than what we have allowed for. In other words, we need to budget carefully for purposes of raising taxes and making clear that we're raising taxes to operate the town effectively. And then we need to then allocate funds to specific projects from the general fund that will be ultimately paid for through ARPA funds.
Great.
So I'm hoping that answers your questions. And if you've got more technical questions about the accounting procedures that we'd follow, I'm sure Fielding would be happy to explain that.
I want to take one final step back for the sake of clarity, because this is a decision that we're looking to make tonight, right? So can you talk a little bit about revenue, what the revenue replacement or the standard allowance for revenue loss, right?
Yes.
How would it play out in sort of, and how it's been outlined in your memo? So can you talk about it with an example, strictly an example, Rod, as just for the final sense of clarity? And then we'll
I will try an example. I think that the first remark I need to make is that clearly the federal treasury, the US Treasury, has made some assumptions about what the size of the organization is that's going to be doing this. And for the most part, it's counties, and those counties have got significantly bigger populations and management structures and infrastructures than we have. So we fall into a category of a rural state and a rural community in a rural state. So there's an operating assumption that the standard allowance means that we can work with the assumption that we encountered losses as a consequence of COVID up to the limit of $10 million. This money that we've received can be expended on any ordinary governmental service that would include buying new equipment and building infrastructure, as well as the operating funds, including salaries and wages. So what we are proposing to do is to use the ARPA funds allocated across each of their qualifying budget years to pay for the operating functions of the town, and to earmark or identify explicitly projects of a certain size with a certain cost that will be completed within the appropriate time frame, and that will be accounted for. And thus, when at the end of this process in 2026, we'll be able to show that we spent ARPA money on ARPA qualified things, and that we operated the town through the collection of taxes through the same period of time. An example would be, we would put extra money in the operating budget for the FY24 fiscal year, equal to the amount that we expect to spend on, say, as an example, replacing the boilers in Tracy Hall. So say that project was $250,000, we would explicitly identify a line item in the budget for $250,000 to replace the boilers in Tracy Hall, and then we'd spend it on that. And then we would be able to document the invoices and receipts to justify that expense.
Okay, so thank you. So I hope that was like, so that's clear. So now we have a shared reality of like how this would operate. All right, so with that in mind, now do we have any other questions or comments, right? Claudia, I see your hand.
Yeah, I appreciated the memo. I think that I also appreciate the lists from the department heads on what they feel the money should be used for. But I also want us to still engage in the community, and share this information from the department heads, but also get some ideas about what they would see as priorities. And then having all of that, then really look, have the board then review everything and decide what the money should be spent on. I don't want to exclude the community, but I also want both them and us to be aware of what our department heads feel are critical for the performance of their departments. Does that make sense?
Yes, so you're saying, just for clarity and apologies, so a public engagement process should engage feedback on these particular projects, or let people know, right, that we care or want to prioritize these projects.
Yes.
In addition to their values and thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Mayor,
Oh, and can I just make one other point? And
Please.
it's been a while since I looked at the final rules, but I would say I don't necessarily agree with Marcia's interpretation of how the final rule is written.
Okay, I can cite you the paragraph that says that particular thing if you want.
Yeah, out of what was it, a 50-page document, you know?
yes, and,
I know, but I
and-
found it.
yes, and mercifully, we have town staff and attorneys and other professional third-party organizations that advise us, right? So we can dig in as much as we want. So Mary, I was actually next, and then Marcia. Go ahead, Mary.
I just need, I think I just want some reassurance, I guess. So if we take this, the standard allowance, and we carefully figure out what our budgeted amounts are, and then ARPA funds that, then is it true that as long as all of our accounting is correct, we've satisfied the ARPA side of things? So then on the other side of things, we still have to pay for all our operating expenses. But if we, for instance, we had a project that required more than the money that we'd freed up by having ARPA pay for our operating expenses. For instance, if we found a grant or we found some state funds or something, that's kind of a separate issue. Do I understand that correctly? If we wanted to add in funds, I just want to be clear about the process.
So can you just, that last part, can you talk a little bit more about add-in funds? I'm not sure
Yes.
I understood that, if that's okay.
Okay, well, as far as ARPA and what that will enable us to do, if I understand this correctly, the ARPA funds would basically replace our operating budget. And so since it has replaced our operating budget, we would have that amount of funds to, freed up in a sense. But I'm thinking there could be other funds. Let's say we had a big project. We could use the funds that were freed up by ARPA. But if we needed a little bit more and there was a state grant not related to any ARPA thing, we could still take advantage of that.
Right. So I see Fielding's prepared to sort of confirm or deny.
Shed
So
some
thank you,
light on
Mary.
that. Okay.
No, I appreciate that. It's important we get clarity. Go ahead, Fielding. Do you have a response for Mary?
Yeah, so Mary, you are understanding correctly. By electing to take the standard allowance, it allows us to offset regular operational budget needs with ARPA funds. Not only does it allow us to do that, it also really lightens the load in terms of reporting and federal audit requirements that come with it along with that. So that I'm just adding that on to your answer a little bit. That is a really nice benefit to us. What that then does is frees up our operational funds to be used not only for a wider array of projects, but also really allows us to, if we do have grant funds that become available, to leverage the equivalent ARPA money that's freed up operationally from the operational budget, and then really maximize our benefit. So if it's a 90-10 grant or an 80-20 grant, something like along those lines, we can really
leverage it.
Exactly. Yes. So you understand correctly, and it really opens up a lot of opportunity for the town.
I also just have one more question. I noticed in the memo, not a recommendation to have a consultant manage the, whatever administrative tasks need to be done to account for the ARPA. And I just want to hear a little bit more about that. I don't want anyone to get overloaded with the requirements for town staff. So.
Right. Rod, do you want to speak to Mary's point about that, like how sort of cumbersome, and then also Marcia's earlier point, so sort of how cumbersome has it been, or how do you anticipate, the management of these federal funds? And then speak to that through maybe the April 30th deadline question.
Okay. So let's go back to Marsha's question first. The deadline is actually April 30th, which is coming up, as you know. And we are struggling to change the system administrator from Herb to me. I am working with the Treasury helpline and service to work that through, but it's still a work in progress. The actual reporting requirements initially are not inconsequential in terms of time investment, but I would describe it as tedious, but not intellectually challenging. So once we're through that, we'll have reporting, the regular reporting period where we need to demonstrate whether we've spent any funds or not. Once the board makes a decision tonight about how to actually manage the funds, then that gives Fielding and me a direction on how to actually report the funds and move them into the operating budget. And then we can report on that. And I don't expect us to be using those funds for the best part of a year. And then the next part is, depending on the balance between community-inspired projects, which we need to talk about tonight, and I agree with Claudette that that's important, and then the already identified, or at least in this memo, these are illustrative projects. They're clearly put together by me and on the basis of information from department heads. They clearly show a way that we could spend the entire allocation on fixing things that we know need to be fixed with buildings and capital and the control of the town. The question of how you would go about doing that is the sort of standard bidding process that we, engage in all the time. So first of all, step one would be using professionals to help configure the engineering aspects of any project that we would undertake, whether it's the boiler replacement or something more fundamental with one of the buildings. Then we'd go out to bid. Then we would use a normal bidding process according to our financial policies, which would use a fixed price. So we would know with some degree of reason what to expect. In the interim, and this is an important parenthetical remark, but it's important to connect. We still don't know the progress of H518. It's moving slowly through the House. $40 million is the earmarked amount to help municipalities upgrade their fossil fuel fired heating systems with renewable energy systems. I just want to point out that there are 250 communities in Vermont. Some of them have already got substantial renewable energy commitments with their municipal buildings, but most don't. So if you think about $500,000 to $1 million per community, clearly $40 million, while it sounds like a huge amount of money, doesn't go very far. So we need to be realistic about what we could potentially access from that fund, but pay attention to the fact that it is there and it could help us. So those are the kinds of things that we're aware of. Those are the kinds of things that we need to develop a more nuanced strategy around. And the expectation would be that the pulling together bid documents would be done by consultants assisting us through the profession, and that we would pay for those through ARPA funds itself. And then the project would be bid out. It would be for a fixed price with a known set of variables about why that might change. And then the project would be completed, and then hopefully it comes in on budget and it works. That would be the general. So we don't feel like the reporting requirements or the creation of bid documents would be so onerous that we couldn't manage that the way we normally manage it.
Okay, thanks for that intel. And then Mary, you have a follow-up, and then I want to hear a little bit from Rob. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm just thinking if, a large amount of funds are being held for a year, how are they being held securely? Are they earning some interest? And also, are they considered part of our general fund? For instance, at town meeting, will our general fund look like a boa constrictor that has swallowed a deer? You know what I mean? Like just really look way out of proportion to what people usually expect.
Oh my gosh, put that into a poster. Okay, yes, thank you, Mary. And I think that's similar to sort of the spirit of what Marcia may have been asking. I won't put words in her mouth, but tell us a little bit more about technically what would that look like from a high level accounting perspective, Fielding. And note that we're at time, so I do want to mention that. Go ahead, Fielding.
So we do have a reserve fund for ARPA funds, which is where they're being held currently. It does get allocated interest. So in terms of the high level accounting, it has its own account, its own fund associated with it. So it's not just commingled in with our general fund.
But to Mary's point, if we were to take this action tonight, what does that change from an accounting level, if anything, is the question.
So I think the thing to really be cognizant of is if we elect to do the standard allowance, we because our emergency reserve fund is fully funded, we want to be very careful about not, if we budget for a project to utilize these ARPA funds to offset some of our operational expenditures like labor and benefits, and then complete this project, we need to ensure that that money is spent in the fiscal year that we budgeted for. This is assuming our reserve fund, our emergency reserve fund, continues to be fully funded. Hopefully nothing bad happens and it does stay that way, but if it does, we need to be very careful about not creating a surplus at the end of the year that we offset operational funds with ARPA funds. Then that creates, that I would say would be the one issue we could have in terms of if we do create this surplus and it's due to the injection of ARPA funds into the operational budget, that would go against guidance and the final rule. So we need to be very, very efficient and very cognizant of what we do. Now, we do have multiple fiscal years that we can allocate for these projects. So if we're not confident that we can do it, say it's fiscal year 24 and our bids are coming in that they're going to do the work on a boiler, say that we do elect to do that project. I'm just using this as an example. But our bids are coming in, they're saying it's going to be June. I would feel nervous about that. And so we want to either ensure that we manage that very effectively and that the work is completed and paid for in June, or we wait until July and the next fiscal year to make that allocation.
Right. Okay. So thank you for that, Fielding. And then Marcia, do you have do you want to make a follow-up? Because I think we're now talking a little bit about what you may, well, I won't frame it for you. Do you have a follow-up?
So on the TRORC website, there's a VLCT developed calculator where municipalities can determine whether any of their ARPA awards can be allocated toward revenue loss. I would feel a whole lot better if we had used that, and they say that NEMRIC can provide technical assistance for doing that. I would feel a whole lot better if we had done that and had some assurance that we were actually not going to be exceeding what we should be doing. Because I asked this question of the LCT lady the other day. I really am worried if we budget for something and then we reimburse ourselves. It seems to me that we then have monies that are our monies that haven't been voted for any particular purpose by people. And even if it goes into a fund, that's a problem. And my final question is, tonight, do we have to make a decision in order for this filing to be done on April 30th?
Yes. So, and I just want to, Marcia, I want to clarify if I may. So I think what is being said is you put your ARPA project in the budget. So we've been using the example of boilers. Let's say you're doing something for the boilers. You put that project in your operating budget that year, and then you spend that you have to, and then it adds to the budget for that year. Voters approve that budget, and you have to make sure you expend it that year, so not to create a surplus, right? And that's what I last heard a little bit from Fielding. So voters will be approving the budget, and that in and of itself may very well is a form of a public engagement process too, right? Because you're saying that this project, which is an ARPA project or something we want to do with our ARPA money, you're putting it into the budget that you wouldn't otherwise have, and then you approve your operating budget at town meeting. That's right, Fielding and Rod? That's what you're saying. Okay, so I just want to clarify. I really want to clarify that and make sure we understand.
So we're
Claudette,
never going to have money. We're never going to have a bubble of money that wasn't accounted for or voted for by the people.
that's not what's being, yeah, we want to avoid that, of course. That's what we're talking about. Right? Everyone's nodding. Okay.
What I want.
I would
Yeah.
also say that, a standard allowance, this $10 million number that allows us, our ARPA funds are well below that number. In terms of, especially with, post-COVID and these financial stimulus packages that have been out, this is pretty common procedure for the federal government to institute these numbers, where anything below that, they make some assumptions, and that you have lost revenue up to such and such an amount, and they have set that. You saw that with PPP loans, you saw that with CARES Act funding. Obviously, there were some technical differences there, but in terms of setting this allowance number for us, this is pretty common practice. So I know I personally feel comfortable choosing the standard allowance based off that knowledge.
Okay, so Claudia, I saw your hand, and I definitely want to turn to oh, well, it's okay, Claudia, I might turn to Rob, if that's okay. Rob, any comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, question as in, does this indicate that since we budgeted for projects with a known income, that we now have more coming in with the ARPA funds? Does that mean that we can't really use the ARPA money 22, 23? Does it have to go into the budget for next March that the voters vote on?
Right,
And I'm
so
not understanding that aspect of it.
So I think Rob is asking, these funds are sort of the process for these funds are imagined through a budgeting process, an operational budgeting process. So do we have to wait? Like, why would that mean that we couldn't sort of begin the work immediately? I guess it might be the question, if we wanted to. Is that the question, Rob?
Yeah.
More or less.
My understanding from what VLCT was saying is that the expenditure of the money is solely at the discretion of the select board.
Yeah.
But if it goes into the general fund, it's very much recommended that public input be gotten before any expenditures were made. But now from what I'm hearing, I'm worried that, I'm curious as to whether or not, if it has to be pre-budgeted and voted on by the public, does that mean we can't do anything until after the next town meeting?
I think that's great. Rob or Rod, do you have a comment for Rob's good question?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. It is a good question. So my understanding is that we need to, for the sake of being able to account for the use of the funds, identify projects and document those projects. And that given that we're about to enter the FY23 year, that gives us the year between July 1, 2022 and June 30th, 2023 to plan out what we're going to do. And then we would be proposing a slate, if you like, of projects for the FY24 budget year that would use ARPA funds, and that process of building the budget, reviewing the budget, discussing that budget with the public, which starts really next month, or no, not quite that badly, but October, the latest, right? So think of this as a sort of an added channel of discussion while we're having a discussion about the budget. And then presumably the voters would be presented with a budget that would identify explicit ARPA projects in March of 2023. And then the expenditure would happen on those, as soon as the clock turned over, right? And so the issue for us to make sure of is that we can expend those funds. In other words, do the project between July 1, 2023 and June 30th, 2024, and then have another go, basically, at least for the FY24 in 25 years. So, we've got $1 million, which, is not inconsequential, but when the sorts of projects we're talking about, this is not actually that difficult to use in that sense. So I think that the complexity here is going to be setting up the process, not so much identifying the projects. And if Fielding's got a different view, then he should pipe up.
Great. Okay, so I see Claudette, I jumped to Rob. Do you want, okay. So Marcia, go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't mean to be pedantic about this, but I'm just having a hard time because it seemed to me that we were supposed to be choosing between reporting we do the standard allowance versus doing a project. And it sounds to me like what we're actually talking about here is going for the standard allowance, which would help us with the reporting, but using it for a real project. And that to me seems like it's not really what the intent was. And so I'm asking again, have we looked at the VLCT calculator to see what we would actually be eligible to call revenue loss?
So go ahead, Claudette, and then go ahead, Claudette.
That VLCT calculator came out well before the final rule came out and well before the initial or the $10 million, whatever you want to call it, came out. Maybe I'm being foolish and maybe I'm being naive, but I cannot believe that Two Rivers and VLCT in their guidance to say, you have this, that you can use your ARPA money for general expenses, that they have not investigated, analyzed, sought legal recommendations, went to Treasury, went to everybody else to say, this is okay. And they've been spreading it throughout the state that this is okay. This is an okay way to use your money. So, Norwich isn't, I am willing to trust that they have done the due diligence. And I know you probably don't agree with that, but that's my take.
No, that's not, can I respond?
Go ahead, yeah.
No, my concern is that we're talking about, it looks like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth, taking the standard allowance, but using it for project.
So, and let's
avoiding reporting.
So,
No.
Okay.
I would argue that you should go back and look at Two Rivers' presentation from our last meeting.
Yeah, I'm looking at the motion here that's recommended. That's what I'm concerned about.
So it's 7:34. We were scheduled to go to 7:15. I'm at this point for the agenda. I want to get us to a point where we feel comfortable making a vote on the standard allowance option, right? We need this for this April 30th deadline and to begin a process. So I think what Marcia is saying, the spirit of what Marcia is saying, Rod and Fielding, is, we're taking how is this, if you will, is this sort of a hybrid approach? Is it how is it more in the spirit of a standard allowance as it's defined, but also provide is also project based? Like it, I think, and like, what is wrong with sort of what is wrong with that, if anything, I guess might be a question.
I'm happy to take a stab at that, and then Gildan can join in. So I'm going to try and use my words really carefully. And I want to acknowledge at the outset that the remarks made by Sarah, which was helpful in some ways, but kind of problematic on another level, of rinsing out the federal character of the dollars, or some term similar to that, was understood to be one of the benefits of taking the standard allowance approach and then moving that money into the general fund. So I'm going to say this as carefully as I can construct it. The purpose of taking the standard allowance and moving it into the general fund is that what it does for us is allows us to manage that money through our regular budgetary process. Norwich is a very lucky town because for many years it has had a wide range, I think over 48 reserve funds identified for specific purposes, and has made annual allocations to those reserve funds and spends from those reserve funds to undertake certain projects or to replace capital items as needed, for instance, fire trucks or boilers. Many towns don't have that. Many towns are riding on maybe a small cushion of an emergency reserve fund, or just maintaining a positive balance in their general fund and hoping that they don't need to do anything urgently, like replace a vital piece of equipment. So we have a set of issues with regard to the operation of our own budget. We don't have any intention of hiding or disguising or pretending that the ARPA money isn't anything other than ARPA money. What we need to do is to represent the ARPA money to the people when it comes time to vote on the budget in a series of projects, so that they can make an assessment as voters on the wisdom of identifying those projects and the realistic, and whether that project is realistic for the funds that have been identified to bring that project to fruition. So by moving the ARPA funds into the general budget and paying benefits and wages from that general fund, it frees up other cash that we have, that we've raised through taxes, to spend on these other projects. But these other projects will be identified carefully, because it's really important for the voters to be able to see that we're assessing the tax at the right rate, and that we're identifying explicit and specific projects that we're going to complete for known cost in a known time frame, because that's the appropriate thing to do for the voters. It also meets the ARPA guidance and meets the requirements of the final rule, as long as we report out in a timely fashion on what we're doing. And so the question that the federal government has is, what did you do with the money? And the answer is, we moved it into the general fund to offset operating losses. And then we spent money on these things that we needed to do as a government, and they'll be explicitly identified.
And so another way, so that's what the feds, that's a conversation between the feds, right? And so if someone in town says, what are you spending the ARPA money? What has the board decided to do with the ARPA money? You might say, well, we took the standard allowance, which means we're going to put ARPA to non-contracted services. And what we're also going to do is identify some projects through the budget process, like the boilers. And we want a public engagement process, both in the budget, but then also we need to figure out separately, what we are going to do to gain interest on projects so we can properly put it in the budget. Right? That might be something you say. Does that make sense? And go ahead, Rob.
Well, I was going to point out that the difference, as I understood it, between standard allowance and having to do normal federal guidelines on projects, is that if we don't take the standard, then we can decide, currently this year on whatever projects we want to do, but they will have to be well documented and follow all the procedures of a normal project that's federally funded. That by taking the standard allowance and putting it into the general fund, we become more accountable to the public. Now we just have to defer the projects, the expenditures until next year. Am I wrong? Okay.
How do you feel? And just Rob, and are you ambivalent about that, Rob? How do you feel about that?
No, I think this is more appropriate because it does require public input more.
Right.
But it saves us money in accounting, and that's fine.
Okay, I want to go to Rod, and then I want to kind of cull the room for last minute thoughts.
I think Rob raises a really important point. If we were to go with the other mode, which is to identify explicit projects, yes, we could start spending that money now in this fiscal year, but we would have to meet all the federal guidance requirements, which are significant and can be demonstrated to add significantly to the cost of the project. And if we were to take that path, then actually the question of whether we need to hire a consultant or not would be back on the table. Because, for instance, anything that involved construction, which could include the boilers, we would have to demonstrate, for instance, that we're compliant with the Davis-Bacon Act. Davis-Bacon Act is a piece of legislation that the federal government has in place where the contractors and the buyers of, or the users of federal money, so that would be the town of Norwich, would have to demonstrate each payroll that the contractors working on the project met the Davis-Bacon standard for income. So it's generally regarded as a significant additional burden and cost, both to the project in the first place in a rural state like Vermont, because you'd be paying contractors more money, and then you have to document that you have paid them more money, and then you have to pay for that documentation. So you basically end up hiring a staff person to monitor the fact that the contractors are being paid the appropriate amount. Now, I want to say immediately, I don't have a problem with people being paid an appropriate amount of money, and I don't have a problem with the federal government making sure that you spend their money in the appropriate way. It's just an acknowledged and recognized issue that's one of the things that comes along with complying with federal documentation. It blends out when you're building a bridge. When you're spending $250 million, then that's not an issue because you're already spending $250 million, right? But it does become an issue if you're spending, $1 million. You're basically giving up $250,000 to documentation and verification, which means that you've got that much less to spend on stuff. So it's an important consideration.
Okay, so we're half an hour over, but I think the question is very clear now, or more clear, and I appreciate everyone's contributions and good pushback and challenges. I think this has been helpful. Any other thoughts from anyone on the specific towards the motion itself? There's obviously a lot to discuss with ARPA. Go ahead, Marcia.
I appreciate and agree that it's a lot easier to use the standard allowance. I still have a problem with the revenue loss, and I think it's going to be an issue. So I can't vote for that.
Okay, thanks. All right, but I nonetheless, I would happily entertain a motion at this point for the discussion. Go ahead, Mary.
I move to adopt the standard allowance for revenue loss to document the use of ARPA funds as revenue replacement in qualifying budget years, as per the U.S. Treasury State and Local Recovery Funds, SLRF, final rule published on May 17th, 2021.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Made by Mary, seconded by Rob. I'm gonna roll call. Mary, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
No.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm a yes. All right, great. So that's the action that we needed to do. It's a half hour over. I would like to move on. I think this is a good work on ARPA follow-up from our discussion with Two Rivers. I'm so interested in sort of what Rob and Claudette were teasing out, right? This idea of like, okay, we have a budgetary process that is familiar, where we can use that to identify projects, right? And hear from department heads quite really easily in that regard. But then I'm also hearing Claudette, and I assume others, saying like, well, you know, there should clearly be a meaningful engagement process separate from all of that as well, right? Because a budget process is in so many ways not insider baseball, but is a process that is deeply familiar to us and less sort of familiar with the people. So Rod, do you have closing thoughts on like how to next handle that specific set of questions, or is your thought just that we have to handle that specific set of questions?
Right now, I have the appropriate indication so that assuming that everything works out with the Treasury and I'm able to get into the portal and indicate the community's preference, I can do that. And so fulfill the requirements of the first reporting period. And then I think that Claudette and others have raised good questions about what the process is going to be going forward. And we have some time. But we need to be serious about moving on to some kind of engagement process with the broader community about some subset of the funds. And so we will call on the select board to make challenging decisions about how you want to frame that. And I'm happy to support you doing that.
Okay, that's great. All right, so let's move on to our next agenda item, if that's okay. All right, so thanks. Go ahead, Claudette.
When you wanted to handle the records restoration issue.
I'm going to do it right before or after the liquor license. So why don't we move on to DPW expenditures? Because I think also Chris Kaufman is here with us. So so this is an expenditure coming from the reserve fund, which is why we're being asked to approve it. But I think I loved the pictures. I'm sure we all loved the pictures illustrating what you intend to do in that break room. But Chris, anything that you can tell us about this expenditure? That's okay. You're on mute.
Okay, there we go. Can everybody hear me now? I apologize. There's actually two projects. And the first project I wanted to bring up is the new keyed security for the DPW. Currently, we have actually 4 doors and a gate that come into the DPW, 2 main doors which have key fobs and are coded. And we currently have Gatekeeper Lock and Safe Company that we have a contract with that provides that service for us. And we have 2 additional doors, one going into an air compressor room, one going into a lunch room, that are actually locked with different keys, and they can be opened from the inside of the facility. Since I've been there, I've noticed we needed to kind of and we also, for the front gate, we have a regular cat key that frankly any contractor could, with a cat key, could go in and just unlock the door and access our facility. So what I was trying to do was put together an actual upgrade to the DPW so we could have a more robust keyed service. And I spent some time with Gatekeeper Lock and Safe Company going over that. We really felt like the fob system was a good way to secure the facility, but because we have fobs that we couldn't account for, they're sort of out there in space now, we couldn't actually find out where they all went to. We decided that it was best to sort of gather the ones we had and uncode the ones that are out there in space, and then sort of recircle the wagon, so to speak, and then key the right ones and assign those to specific people. So basically we had 4 items we wanted to do. We wanted, pardon me for a second. Apologize for that.
No worries.
No, this always happens every time.
Yeah.
So I apologize. So the first item is to put a heavier duty lock on our gate. so that we can actually make sure that we are protected, and we have a lot of expensive equipment there, and we want to make sure that we know who's coming and going from the facility. The second item is to rekey the interior doors. Basically, the two doors are there set up with a storeroom function, so you can actually not unlock them if you're leaving and then forget. So you could bypass the two main doors, which are the what they call the Kaba keypad lever. So we would be updating those, and everything would be assigned with a master key. And we would have just a few master keys assigned to the appropriate people, myself, and obviously Rod, and a backup. And also my office being rekeyed. Unfortunately, it has some problems and can be just pried open pretty easily. So so I got two quotes, one for $2,403.75. That's with the no software. And the quote two was for $3,802.25. And that was with the software. And the software would allow us to be able to actually access who's actually coming and going within the facility. So I felt that was an important actually to know who's coming and going in the facility, especially with the key fobs going in and out. So that was project number one. And let me mention about project number two. Project number two is the lunchroom counter and cabinets, and I got a quote and a rendering from Home Depot that I felt was very, I don't know if everybody's seen that. Basically right now, we have a lunchroom that's pretty basic. We have folks that work during the winter time that come in, and we work really late hours. We come in super early. There's really not a good place for anybody to really prepare their lunches and their meals. Right now we're washing plates in the bathroom sink, and I think I really felt like it's important to have at least a proper counter and some storage space for some plates, and have a sink where we could wash dishes, frankly, and do the things that I think when you're spending sometimes upwards of 12 to 15 hours on long winter days in and out all night, that people can actually have a nice meal and sit down, and they're working hard for us. And so that project to put the counters in is about $2,300. To install them is another $1,200. The countertop is $1,000, and basically the sink and faucet we would procure directly from Home Depot and then install that ourselves, because the water and everything is already there, so we would just be hooking it right up. So the total cost of that project would be approximately $5,000. So.
Okay, and just to thank you so much, Chris. And just to clarify, because we have a motion to approve expenditures of up to $5,000 from the Highway Garage Reserve Fund. So I want to so that is including the new keyed security and lunchroom counter. No,
the lunchroom counters would be $5,000, including everything there, and then it would be for the new keyed system. It would be $3,802.25 with the software. So it would be a total of $8,802.25.
Okay, so that's just a note to note for board members that we have a motion sheet for the expenditure. The $5,000 is representing the expenditure for the lunchroom counter, and we'll just going to ask you to repeat the amount for the keyed security. And does that include the software suite that you mentioned, the comings and goings sort of software tracking?
Yes, for the software tracking, it's $3,802.25.
Mary, are you recording the dollar amount?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So thank you. So that just for the clarity of that. Do any board members have any questions? We have a little bit of time for some questions of Chris. I see Marcia's hand.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
So has theft been a huge problem? I'm sort of shocked. This seems like Fort Knox security, and I'm just wondering, in Little Norwich, is it overkill? And my second question is, we just bought lockers. We have it looks to me like 25,000 in reserve. And so this would significantly, or designated funds, significantly knock that down because you've already bought lockers. So what else is coming up that you think you might need?
Well, I would say at this point, to answer your question about security, what we're doing is essentially we're utilizing the same security system we've always had, which is fobs and keys, but essentially it's creating a master key that actually allows us to access all doors, and also eliminates the possibility of somebody leaving the doors unlocked on the side doors that could be just easily just somebody walk right in. And also, as I mentioned, we have fobs out there that we just do not know where they are. I don't know anything about whether or not there's any sort of, you know, situation where somebody's taking things. I don't know that. I'm just saying that I think it's important that we have a significant amount of money in materials and equipment and supplies, and we should be cognizant of the fact that we should protect that. I don't think we're turning it into anything more than what it is, other than just making sure that we know who's got the fobs, we know which keys are out there and who they're assigned to, and that we're basically making sure that the facility is secure when nobody's there.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
And the second part?
And the second part, in terms of other projects coming up, I mean, right now, basically, I'm just evaluating different situations at the DPW in terms of the building itself and some other items that I might be interested in pursuing in terms of this, basically some barn overlay for our equipment, so we can protect our equipment that is currently out there right now. We don't have a good place to park all our excess equipment. Basically, it's parked in the open, and it's just really not a good way to protect the existing equipment we have. So I've really spent a lot of time reorganizing and cleaning out a lot of things to make as much room as possible, but we still have equipment that is not safely covered and have the ability to function and protect the equipment in a proper manner. So I am looking at a couple of those different things.
That exceed
Okay.
25,000?
Marcia, I'm gonna move us on because I think Chris answered the question that he's going through a period of assessment. So Mary, I want you to make your comment.
My initial question is the chain that is at the entrance sufficient? You know, talk about a bigger lock, but you know, and maybe it's fine. But I also wanted to say that I think lunch counters, a decent place to prepare a meal, is the least we can do for our essential workers. They have to get out there in a snowstorm and take care of these weather incidents. And I think it's money well spent. And I also think it's very prudent to have adequate security systems to protect, you know, all the resources that the taxpayers have paid to make our Department of Public Works function very well. And also just to create a coherent working environment out there. So I think these are very reasonable requests. And I support them 100%.
Okay, to that end, thank you, Mary. To that end, would you, we've got the new totals, right? Would you mind separating them into sort of two motions?
I think I can, I could put them into one.
If you can do the math, if you can do the math quickly, bless you, and I would love that.
Okay. I move to approve the expenditure of up to $5,000 for lunchroom improvements to the highway garage. Also to approve the expenditure of $3,802.25 for upgrades of security equipment. Both expenditures to come from the highway garage reserve fund for improvements.
Okay, thank you so much, Mary. Is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. Okay, go ahead, real final comments. Go ahead, Marcia.
It's not a comment. I still am, in favor of people having a good place to eat. I'm in favor of keeping things secure. I'm in favor of having covers for other equipment. But I'm also in favor of budgeting. And so I'd like to know, we've got 25,000. We've already spent some money on the lockers. I think it would be reasonable to say, could we have a structure so that we know in this budget season, whatever you're going to use won't exceed that amount of money, and that we can budget for whatever we need in the future for next year, so that, you know, maybe put priorities on things.
Thank you for your comment. We're here to make a very particular expenditure approval, right? So that's the agenda item. Claudette, did you have any further comment?
I was just going to comment that anything else that comes to the board or that any other spending coming from the designated fund would need to come before the board. So it's up to us, you know. So if there's not money in the designated fund to do whatever Chris wants to have done, then we can't do it unless we find another pot of money to do it in. So that's, I guess your concern, Marcia, to me is like a non-issue.
Right, I'm just pointing it out to Chris because I wanted him to be thinking that way.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm definitely keeping track of the budget and being cognizant of that, so.
Great. Respectfully, go ahead, Mary, but I really want to move this on.
Okay, only that the issue that Chris raised about covering the vehicles outside is an identified need. It goes back to Neil Fulton, who was also concerned. Just to say that it's a long-standing need out there.
Right. Okay, great. So we have the motion on the table. Thank you for that work, Mary. I'm so sorry. Did I get a second on the motion? It was seconded by Claudette. Is that right? Thank you. Okay, so all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, so let's move on to, I believe the next item on the agenda is the zoning administrator question, contract staffing zoning administrator. Yeah. So board to approve entering into contract with TRRC to provide zoning administrative services until June 24th, 2022. Rod had a very a clear memo outlining the request. We've been talking about the zoning administrator in different contexts for a while, right? So why don't I begin with a motion, if that's okay, and then we'll have a discussion. So go ahead, Mary.
I move to authorize the town manager to sign the short-term agreement with TRORC for the provision of municipal zoning services not to exceed $7,200.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. Okay, we have 10 minutes of discussion. Go ahead. Marcia?
Do we have a response from our attorney about the proper structuring of planning directors, planning commission, zoning administrator?
Okay, I'll ask Rod to address that. Are there any other questions about this from other board members? Okay, all right. So this is the chief discussion. Rod, do you have an update from the attorney? I noticed in the job description for the A-line zoning administrator, it references statute and talks about reporting authorities pretty clearly. Anything, any update or anything discussed to date?
We've not yet received a written response from town council. Verbally, there's a confirmation from town council that affirming that statute requires that a zoning administrator be appointed by the select board and therefore can only be removed or replaced by the select board, and that statute lays out the process for a zoning administrator being able to make a decision, and then what the process is if somebody seeks to appeal that decision. So I would say that the contract that you see before you from Two Rivers is consistent with verbal advice from council, and is consistent with the way I have been appointed as zoning administrator by the board when I was first hired. And consistent with my experience of the way zoning administrators are handled from a statutory point of view across the state. And so they believe that the contract is consistent with statutory provisions as they're laid out.
Okay, great. Any further discussion?
I'd prefer to wait until the attorney has answered all of the questions in the memo, because it's not just about who hires the zoning administrator. It's about the entire structure that we have. So I'd prefer to wait.
Okay, so obviously Rod's memo referenced why this is felt to be timely, right? It'll be a while likely before we could find a zoning administrator because there's lots of other towns who are looking, amongst other reasons. So we still have obligations to our community to make sure that deadlines are met and permits are completed. It is spring, right? So there's a need that has been defined. Go ahead, Marcia.
So I understand the need, and I understand that under this proposal, if we hired someone, this particular agreement would be null and void. If the attorney comes back and says that our structure is inappropriate, will this be null and void as well? I would think that should be the case, but if you can confirm that that would be everybody's understanding and intent, then I could vote for this.
Let me ask, does anyone share, does anyone share Marcia's concerns about the structure of zoning and planning in the town of Norwich?
Respectfully, no.
Okay, so I think the majority of the board is is saying they can move forward. Hearing the sort of preliminary verbal report or preview from the attorney. Okay, so I believe we have a motion on the table. If there's no further discussion, I'll roll call if that's okay. And I do, I know a formal opinion sounds forthcoming. Is that right, Rod? Okay. So I'll call the question. Mary, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Okay, Claudette,
Yes.
Marcia?
No, pending answer from the attorney.
Great, and I'm a yes. Okay, so thank you, Rod, for bringing this to our attention. And I imagine the DRB will be introduced and onboarded to this person that they'll be working with. Go ahead, Rod.
So actually, the next step procedurally is the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the Select Board to appoint the zoning administrator. So at the next meeting, they'll open a Planning Commission meeting. The prospective zoning administrator will be introduced to the Planning Commission. I expect the Planning Commission to be able to make a recommendation to the Select Board to appoint them as a zoning administrator, and that's an act that you'll have to do formally.
Right. Thank you so much, because we're just approving the
contract
mechanism to begin it. Yeah. All right. Thank you for that statutory distinction. All right. Thanks. We'll move on to, so let's talk about the added agenda item that we had done for this. I believe I am the one who has, I was sent by Miranda via Bonnie what this is. So I'll have the well, I think, oh no, there was an added motion to the motion sheet. I apologize. My apologies. So why don't we begin with a motion if that's the case?
Okay.
Go ahead.
I move to authorize the additional expenditure of $1,115 from the Records Restoration Reserve Fund for services to be provided by COT Systems. This is in addition to the $26,058 expenditure to COT System authorized by the Select Board on April 13th, 2022. The total expenditure from the Records Restoration Reserve Fund shall be $27,173.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. So my understanding is the length of that motion is to make very clear, right, what, sort of transpired, right? So my understanding is in follow-up with the vendor, we learned that there was just an additional expense that wasn't accounted for. And so a PO, right, which was issued with our internal system to, to make an addition, and it's a designated or it's a reserve fund, so it's coming back to us, and the law in motion describes what we need to do for the record. This feels very technical. Any or administrative? Any further questions? Go ahead, Marcia.
Just quickly, the reserve fund is 5,000, and I'm sorry, how much was it that we needed? No, is that wrong, Claudette?
Reserve fund is in, I want to say like maybe 30,000-ish or more.
It's well over, actually. I think it's up. If it's not an 80,000, it's approaching that with this year's records and restoration funding, what we've allocated in prior years. There's more than enough to cover this expense.
You might be referent at one point in the budget process, Marcia, there was a $5,000 allocation, and maybe that's the number you might be thinking of.
That's the number I see on page 15. But if we have that amount, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, we do. The state has been reimbursing us for certain fees that have really punched up this designated fund significantly.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Miranda, for coordinating this request with Bonnie. So I believe we have a motion and a second, so I'm happy to call the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thanks so much. All right, and now this is so I think the final liquor license in the town of Norwich. So we'll have to, put on different hats, so to speak. So can we begin that process?
I move to recess the select board meeting.
Second.
Is there a second? Made by Mary, seconded by Claudette, I think. I saw her hand. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Unanimous?
Let's see, I move to convene as the Norwich Liquor Commission.
Is there a second? Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. All in favor, please raise your hand. Hello, liquor commissioners.
I move to approve the liquor license application for PLR Enterprises, Inc., DBA Norwich Wines and Spirits.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Marcia. Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, no worries. Any discussion on this, on the liquor license? All right, so all in favor, please raise your hand. Lovely, brilliant. Okay, so I think we've earned a break, is that right?
Well, we have to close our.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry,
So-
still a commissioner. Go ahead. Thank you, Mary.
I move to close the Norwich Liquor Commission session and reconvene the select board meeting.
Do we
Second.
really want to do that? Okay, yeah, we do. Seconded by Marcia. All right, all in favor? Okay, great. Thanks. Now we're ourselves. And as ourselves, we've earned a 5-minute break. Do we want to do 5 minutes or do you want 10?
It'll be 10.
Okay, we can take 10. So
Thank you.
8:24, I think is the math.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. See you soon. My wife in the background said, "Who is this? What meeting is this?" I'm like, oh. So anyway, okay, it's a select board meeting, which we're resuming at 8:25. Okay, so Marcia brought to our concern sort of at the approval of the agenda, we might want to rearrange. I have maybe a more easier suggestion, which is we should really sort of table meeting calendar and goal planning, board to review calendar and Gantt chart to make preliminary decisions, in part because the Gantt chart, I was charging myself with working on that from everyone's feedback, and it's just been a week where I have not been able to advance that. but I do think we should maybe talk very broadly about what is upcoming in the short term, or what could be upcoming in the short term, just so we have a sense of that, if that makes any sense. So, for example, I know that the Affordable Housing Subcommittee is really eager to report to us of the findings of their public town-owned land investigation, right? That was part of their housing strategy. You know, I know that the Trails Subcommittee wants to similarly also present to us about the trail network in Norwich. So I can see off the top that the committees are requesting time to engage with us. And I know that there's an interest in engaging back with them. So so I wanted to note that as something we need to. The Article 36 task force, it wants a response to their submitted report. Similarly, the childcare committee hasn't received the benefit of formal feedback either. So I think there's a lot of committee things that are emerging that I would have wanted to more meaningfully calendar out, but nonetheless are upcoming. So I'll stop talking for a second right there. But I think, go ahead, Mary.
I think it would be reasonable to take up feedback to committees. I also know we had a notion of getting to know the departments better. That might be more reasonable to take place a little farther along in the year when things have settled down a bit, and perhaps to figure out how to do it as a group. So I don't want to lose sight of that. We may have to let go of that, but I don't want to, let go of that completely. I'd like to revisit it at some point.
Okay. Any other, I guess my question, because I'm changing sort of the spirit of this agenda item on the fly, with thank you for all of your patience, is what do we see as needing, what do you see as imminent needs of addressing? Maybe something that anyone wants to highlight from some of their past memos that they were submitted for this exercise. Maybe that's a good question. Go ahead, Marcia.
Personnel issues and policies. Cohesion with the work of all employees, elected officials, and appointed persons. This is coming from my memo back in March. Financial stuff, I think we need to go back to the policies. That's important. The animal ordinance, I think, is very important because we're coming into the season. And public safety, that's kind of fallen by the wayside. I also agree with Mary. I think we need to get out to the departments, and I think we need to do that sooner rather than later.
Okay. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, I think probably at our next meeting, it would be good to get everything that we had previously discussed or submitted in our memos, and really sit down and rank order them and determine what it is that we can actually physically do.
So effective, so in many ways we should be tabling this agenda item and just know that we're going to take it up.
Yeah.
Sounds good. But we have an idea how to frame it when we come back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's literally this action as described: board to review calendar Gantt chart from previously submitted board feedback to make preliminary decisions. So we're essentially tabling what, we need a document for our discussion. Okay.
It's okay with me if we table it. I can't speak for others.
Well, I'm seeing that from
Yes.
people.
Unless we want to go to 11 o'clock again.
No, I wrote on this agenda no later than 9, which is a different version than way too late, as Claudette sometimes used to write. Okay. All right. So we'll agree by consensus to table this agenda item. Okay, all right, and we'll let Miranda note that. And so we'll go into our next agenda item, which is personnel. And so we'll begin with a motion for executive session. I should say that we'll talk more transparently in the public following our executive session. I anticipate that we're going into executive to discuss the work of working. We're going into executive because we're going to be discussing particular personnel matters, but nonetheless, we'll talk more openly once we've come out of public session. I think that's reasonable to anticipate. So why don't we begin with the motion? Go ahead, Mary.
I move to enter executive session under 1 VSA section 313A3, evaluation of public officer or employee, to discuss a personnel issue and to include the town manager.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, I heard Claudette, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. Go ahead, I see your hand, Marcia.
Friendly amendment. Can we just amend it to say, and to invite the town manager? I would really like to talk to the board as the board first in executive session and then invite the town manager.
Sure. So last time what we had done, we had the amendment of inviting Rod in, and I had said that we would have the option to like ask Rod to step in and step out and have the meeting times reflect that. And we chose not to do that last time. And I would note that again.
Well, I've asked if we could have a friendly amendment. Anybody agree?
No, thanks.
Okay. All right. We can very much make that decision and note the meeting times. So we have a motion, a second. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. And so for other folks, I'll put you in the waiting room, or I'll move you into the waiting room with thanks.
Huh?
And Miranda, if you would like, you could step out and we'll note it if you'd like. It will. I can't hear you, but I just wanted to let you know that.
I'll be here when you come back.
Okay. Okay. Is there a motion to enter public session?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. We're now in public session. So why don't we, I believe there's an action that we wish to take. Why don't we begin with that action, and then I'll read some notes by way of a little bit of an explanation, all right? So go ahead, Mary, will you make the motion?
I move to authorize the chair to sign the contract with Mark Heyman of HR Happens to assist the town in building a positive work environment for all.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. Okay, in the discussion, I'll just read some notes that are informed by our conversation that the board just had. So we have heard from our employees and also our town manager in ways that have made it clear that we need new ways of working together and in a respectful and supportive way. We also believe that we need to look at the internal structure of the organization and consider the town as a workplace, not just as a place of government and governance. Workplace challenges and building teams are challenging and important work, and they take time. We recognize that we are not unique right now, that many communities are facing workplace issues exacerbated perhaps by the pandemic. The HR consultant that we just authorized a contract with will be independent. Their independence can be assured. They will work to assess the workplace culture and to make a set of recommendations. and we will look to possibly evaluate and develop new policies and procedures as needed, right? And I think I would say that the work will begin first with a series of employee interviews in order to begin the assessment of that workplace culture. Okay.
You do have to vote on this.
Yes, I just wanted to just wanted to provide some context, right? We were deliberating and having conversations for a while, and I think this represents the crux of our discussion. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So all in favor, please raise your hand. All right. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to all of our employees. Thank you to Rod. We're really looking forward to the opportunity to engage this HR consultant and to get the recommendations. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Marcia. All in favor, please raise your hand.
I almost want to do a Langus and say, I abstain. No, I am voting in the affirmative.
All right. I really appreciate you all. I really appreciate this work. I really appreciate all of you. And I mean that. All right.
Thank you.
Good
Take
night.
care.
Good night.
Thanks, son.